Ambassador Feierstein, now the US and Qatar just signed the $12 billion agreement for F-15 fighter jets. Even though the deal is a long time in the making, surely the US could have delayed it if they wanted to do. Why do you think they declare this cooperation at this particular moment?
Well, I think that the issue of possible delay in the announcement of the sale was certainly something that the administration looked at. But I think that the decision to go forward was a clear signal that indeed the United States remains committed to the bilateral relationship with Qatar and that we continue to value our bipartisan or binational cooperation with Qatar on security and defense issues. So this was an important sale. It's been in the works, as you said, for quite a long time, and the decision was made that we should proceed as normal.
Mr. Javedanfar, how do you look at this apparently conflicting signal coming out of Washington, D.C.? Do you think it's an opportunistic move by the United States?
I think it's very realistic, to be honest with you. The United States, despite the fact that President Trump supported the Saudis, and he has much better Saudis based by his statements, he has much better relations with the Saudis than the Qataris. But at the same time, he cannot ignore Qatar. Qatar is host to US Central Command, Air Force Central Command, where it has 110,000 US forces there. And also Qatar is an important partner in terms of buying US weapons and also in security partner for the United States in the area. So I think despite the rhetoric that we hear from the White House, the US security establishment is taking a very realistic approach towards this towards the current tensions between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And despite the president taking sides, the rest of the administration, the US and the security establishment is trying to maintain those relations with Qatar because they know that one day these tensions are going to be over and they don't want to be on the losing side.
Ambassador Feierstein, now a joint naval exercise by the US and Qatari troops in the Gulf has just finished. Now 2 US Navy vessels participated. What do you think is the purpose and significance of this drill?
Well, there was a bit of a disagreement between the Qataris and the Pentagon about the nature of the US Navy engagement over the last few days. Where the Qataris termed it as a military exercise. The Pentagon put out a statement saying that it was really just a routine port visit as we conduct with all of our friends and partners in the Gulf. So I wouldn't overestimate the significance of that. It was, again, possibly quite a routine visit and something that we do on a regular basis. These visits, these port calls are something that is generally speaking prepared months or even years in advance. So it was again, I think, a sign that the United States is proceeding in its security relationship with Qatar as business as usual.
Mr. Javedanfar, now given the US's large military base in Qatar, as you rightfully pointed out, it's actually not affordable for the United States to be antagonist towards the ruling family there. However, US President Donald Trump was clearly picking sides and making it very clear where his position was concerning the issue of cutting diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Why do you think President Trump did that, and right before he's about to announce the the F-15 fighter jet sales?
I think that's an excellent question and one which is difficult to answer. The President of the United States, in similar scenarios when two of its key allies are in a state of tensions like this, should do his best in order to create a rapprochement and a solution, not add fuel to the fire as President Trump did. This is, I think, the best answer I could give you is that President Trump has proved himself to be very inexperienced when it comes to the issues relating to foreign policy. He made a statement, it seems perhaps it was off the cuff. Of course, maybe the United States has some issues with Qatari behavior. However, Twitter is not the place to go and express your views, especially not in 140 characters when it comes to something as complicated as the current issue between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. So I think at best I can put it down to inexperience, and I'm sure there are many within the US government and US defense establishment that are hoping and praying that this is the last time the president takes such a damaging stance to the interest of the United States.
Ambassador Feierstein, what is your take on this? Basically, as we have also found out that Secretary of State Tillerson was working hard to call on both sides of the conflict to stay calm, to cool down, to work this out, while President Trump was being very harsh and taking sides. What do you think is the possible explanation of what we just experienced?
Well, I agree with your other guest. I think that this was a reflection of inexperience on the part of the White House team, not only the president, but some of the people who are around him, that they had had a very successful visit by the Deputy Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, have worked out very close relationships with some of the principals in the United Arab Emirates. And I think that their first instinct was to be supportive of their friends without really thinking through the implications of the issue. Whereas in the State Department and the Defense Department, you had people who understood the potential consequences of allowing this problem to fester. This isn't a new issue. This is a problem that's gone on for a number of years. The United States has always had a policy of trying to encourage our friends and partners in the region to work through their issues through negotiation, through dialogue, and the first instinct in state and defense was to go back to that traditional role that the United States has played. I think that what we've seen over the course of this period is that gradually the White House is being brought into line with the State and Defense Department experts, and we've seen, I think, a decline in the desire on the part of the White House to really push a position that is at variance with the U.S. traditional role.
Mr. Javedanfar, it's interesting to see the reaction of regional countries towards this crisis, especially lately the action of Turkey. Now, Turkey has stood out among those helping to negotiate a way through the crisis. It condemned the blockade against Qatar and has sent food. Now, the latest news is that Turkish troops arrived in Qatar for a military exercise on Sunday. Are we seeing a further polarization of Sunnis and Shiites in the region, you think?
Well, Qatar itself is a Sunni state, so is Saudi Arabia. I think it's going beyond that. I think the paradigm I'd like to use for the conflict between the current tensions between the Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the more important and more powerful paradigm is state sovereignty versus regional solidarity. Qatar wants to exercise its own sovereignty. It wants to carry out policies that sees to its own interests. Of course, some other countries in the region, the 6 members of the Persian Gulf Cooperation Council, they disagree with it. They expect Qatar to act in terms of regional solidarity when it comes to issues such as Iran and Syria. But it seems that for now, the Qataris are going to practice state sovereignty, their own state interests, putting that before that of regional solidarity, and that's going to have implications when it comes to Syria. Let's not forget that the conflict in Syria took one step closer to becoming even more conflict. The United States shot down a Syrian aircraft, and now the Russians have said that they are going to shoot any allied aircraft they see over the skies of Syria. This means that finding a solution for the Qatar tensions is now become even more urgent.
Ambassador Feierstein, what is your take at this? What do you think is the fallout of the diplomatic crisis between Saudi Arabia and its friends against Qatar going to have on the conflict in Syria?
Well, it's hard to say, and I would say that one thing that we're hearing from our friends in Doha is that they intend to step up their cooperation with the coalition in Syria, that they intend to engage militarily in a way that they haven't over these past months because of their commitments to support the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. And so I think that one of the things that we're going to see going forward is that the Qataris are actually going to use this conflict as a way of solidifying their relationships, not only with the United States, but with other key partners, European and more broadly in the region. You mentioned the Turks earlier. I think that it will strengthen the Qatari relationship with Turkey, and they are going to try to use this as a way of isolating and marginalizing the Saudis and the Emiratis. But most importantly, I think that it is critical that we find a way of diffusing this crisis as quickly as possible to avoid doing damage to U.S. and regional broader interests, not only in Syria but also in Yemen, and also in terms of the effort to confront Iranian behavior in the region.
Many thanks to the two gentlemen joining us today, Gerald Feierstein, former U.S. ambassador to Yemen, and Mr. Meir Javedanfar, a Middle East analyst based in Israel. Now, here is my last point. America's mixed signals appear to be throwing up as many questions as it does answers, but through the analysis of our guests, we have come to understanding the situation a bit better. However, the row over Qatar is perhaps in reality also about how major powers can ensure they get a share of the huge natural gas reserves that lie underneath the desert in the Gulf Sheikhdom. Since 2006, Qatar has been the biggest LNG exporter in the world, and they have been an important source of gas for countries in both Asia and in Europe. Whatever political rhetoric these countries might come up with, the fact is they need energy to be able to drive their own economies. That one fact often speaks louder than words in determining foreign policy.